What the Buddha Taught by Walpola Rahula. And we are on Chapter 6, The Doctrine of No Soul. Anatta. Perception, mental formation, and consciousness, and says that none of these things is self, but he does not say that there is no self at all in man or anywhere else, apart from these aggregates. This position is untenable for two reasons. One is that standing according to the Buddha's teaching, a being is composed of only these five aggregates and nothing more. Nor has he said that there was anything more than these five aggregates in a being. The second reason is that the Buddha denied categorically in unequivocal terms, in more than one place, that the existence of an Atman, soul, self, or ego within a man or without or anywhere else in the universe. Let us take some examples. Some people use the word ego like it's a false self. And the Dhammapada. There are three verses extremely important and essential in the Buddha's teaching. They are numbers 5, 6, 7 of chapter 10, are verses 277, 278, and 279. The first two verses say, all conditioned things are impermanent. Sabba samkara anicca, and all conditioned things are dukkha. Sabba samkara dukkha. The third verse says, all dhammas are without self. Sabba dhamma anatta. Here it should be carefully observed that in the first two verses, the word samkara, conditioned things, is used, but in its place, in the third verse, is the word dhamma. Why didn't the third verse use the word samkara, conditioned things, as the previous two verses, and why did it use the term dhamma instead? Here lies the crux of the whole matter. The term samkara denotes the five aggregates, all conditioned, interdependent, relative things and states, both physical and mental. If the third verse said, all samkara, conditioned things, are without evil, then one might think that, though conditioned things are without self, yet there may be a self outside conditioned things, outside the five aggregates. It is in order to avoid misunderstanding that the term Dhamma is used in the third verse. F.L. Woodward's translation of the word Dhamma, here by all states compounded, is quite wrong. All states compounded means only samkara, but not Dhamma. Samkara, in the list of the five aggregates, means mental formations or mental activities producing karmic effects. But here it means all conditioned and compounded things, including the five aggregates. The term samkara has different connotations in the different contexts. The term Dhamma is much wider than samkara. There is no term in Buddhist terminology wider than Dhamma. It includes not only the conditioned things, states, but also the non-conditioned, the absolute nirvana. There is nothing in the universe or outside, good or bad, conditioned or non-conditioned, relative or absolute, which is not included in this term. Therefore, it is quite clear, according to this statement, all dhammas are without self. There is no self, no atma, not only in the five aggregates, but nowhere else. Two outside them are apart from them. This means, according to the Theravada teaching, that there is no self either in the individual, Vagala, or in Dhammas. The Mahayana Buddhist philosophy maintains exactly the same position, without the slightest difference on this point, putting emphasis on Dharma, Nairatmya, as well as on the Padgala Nairatmya. In the Alagadupama Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, addressing his disciples, the Buddha said, obikos. Obikus accept a soul theory, attavada, in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulations. But do you see, O bhikkhus, with such a soul theory, in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulation? Certainly not, sir. Good, O bhikkhus. I too, O bhikkhus, do not see a soul theory, in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulation. If there had been any soul theory which the Buddha had accepted, he would certainly have explained it here, because he asks the bhikkhus to accept that soul theory which did not produce suffering. But in the Buddha's view, there is no such soul theory, and any soul theory, whatever it may be, however subtle and sublime, is false and imaginary, creating all kinds of problems, producing in its train grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, tribulation, and trouble. Also, sebbe, samkara, and nitya, all conditioned things, are impermanent. Sebbe, dhamma, anatta, all dhammas are without self. And so, we got to look the reality of self. We got to look past the conditioned states, past the clinging, past the, even my role as a male. I'm not saying that this body is not male or something like that. I'm saying that these are things that we operate in life. And if the soul passes on, that's another thing. If the soul's just part of living, and maybe it's not part of us when we die, that's another interesting thought. But that doesn't mean there's not some reality behind all this. It's just not some, again, impermanent thing that we can easily define. And it really does seem like you have no self when you realize what that self is. Well, I mean, in some aspects, I could understand why a person would use that phrase, because it really is, the ego, the mental construction of consciousness. It's something beyond that. That's not what it is, no matter how firm that structure of consciousness is. Continuing the discourse, the Buddha said in the same sutta, O bhikkhus, when neither self nor anything pertaining to self can truly really be found, the speculative view, the universe is that Atman, soul, I shall be that after death, permanent, abiding, everlasting, unchanging, and I shall exist as such for eternity. It is not wholly and completely foolish. Here the Buddha explicitly states that an Atman, our soul or self, is nowhere to be found in reality, and it is foolish to believe that there is such a thing. Those who seek a self in the Buddha's teaching quote a few examples which they first translate wrongly and then misinterpret. One of them is the well-known line, Atta he atano natho, from the Dhammapada 12:4, our verse 160, which is translated as self is the Lord of self, and then interpreted to mean that the big self is the Lord of the small self. First of all, this translation is incorrect. Atta here does not mean self in the sense of a soul. In Pali, the word atta is generally used as a reflexive or indefinite pronoun, except in a few cases where it specifically and philosophically refers to soul theory, as we have seen above. But in general usage, as in the 12th chapter in the Dhammapada, where this line occurs, and in many other places, it is used as a reflexive or an indefinite pronoun, meaning myself, yourself, himself, one, oneself, etc. Next, the word natho does not mean Lord, but refuge, support, help, protection. Therefore, atta he ateno natho really means one is one's own refuge, or one is one's own help or support. It has nothing to do with any metaphysical soul or self. It simply means that you have to rely on yourself and not on others. Referring to this passage, S. Radhakrishnan says, it is the false view that clamors for the perpetual continuance of the small self that the Buddha refutes. We cannot agree with this remark. On the contrary, the Buddha in fact refutes here the universal Atman or soul. The all one soul idea is, yeah, that doesn't really pan out. Obviously, there's different differentiating consciousnesses and other issues with it. As we just saw now in the earlier passage, the Buddha did not accept any self, great or small. In his view, all theories of the Atman were false, mental projections. Again, what I said in my white initiation was about removing the mental projections. There can be a structure there, but generally, putting a bunch of egregores and other stuff. Oh, yeah, but yeah, we have all these photos of the Buddha, so they kind of missed a lot of that. In his article, Vedanta and Buddhism, H. von Glasenapp explains his point clearly. The commentary on the Dhammapada says, Natho te patitta natho means support, refuge, help, protection. The old Sinhalese Sanaya of the Dhammapada paraphrases the word Natho as Behita Vinaya. It is a support, refuge, help. Dhammapada Puranasanaya. If we take this negative form of Natho, the meaning becomes further confirmed. Anatta does not mean without a lord or lordless, but it means helpless, supportless, unprotected, poor. Even in the PTS Pali Dictionary explains the word Natha as protector, refuge, help, but not as lord. The translation of the word Lokanatha by Savior of the world is just using a popular Christian expression. It is not quite correct, because the Buddha was not a savior, in that way of speaking. More like the Zoroastrian way of speaking, right? But again, we don't have him portrayed as a prophet, although some of the earlier ones we kind of do. But there is, a couple aberrations to the atheist Buddha theory, but that was the importance of Buddhism passing on as, what's the psychology behind religion, right? This epithet really means refuge of the world. But again, not refuge in terms of I seek refuge with the Lord of the worlds or anything like that. One's own refuge, one's own help or support has nothing to do with any metaphysical soul or self. It simply means that you have to rely on yourself and not on others. Okay, so the universal soul thing is that, okay, well, if you, the way of rejecting that is saying that, oh, well, I'm my own Lord and Savior, so I have to be my own Lord and Savior with the lowercase l. It's not negating an uppercase Lord and Savior, but not a vicarious suffering or anything like that. Another example of an attempt to introduce the idea of self into the Buddha's teaching is in the well-known words Atadipa Viharatha Atasarana Ananasarana, which are taken out of context in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. This phrase literally means dwell, making yourselves your island, support, making yourselves your refuge, and not anyone else as your refuge. Those who wish to see a self in Buddhism interpret the words Atadipa and Atasarana, taking self as a lamp, taking self as a refuge. We cannot understand the full meaning and significance of the advice of the Buddha to Ananda unless we take into consideration the background and the context in which these words were spoken. The Buddha was at the time staying in a village called Baluva. It was just 3 months before his death. Pare Nirvana. At this time, he was 80 years old, and he was suffering from a very serious illness, almost dying. Aran Antika. But he thought it was not proper for him to die without breaking it to his disciples, who were near and dear to him. So with courage and determination, He bore all of his pains, got the better of his illness, and recovered, but his health was still poor. After his recovery, he was seated one day in the shade outside his residence. Anatta, the most devoted attendant of the Buddha, went to his beloved master and sat near him and said, "Sir, I have looked after the health of the Blessed One. I have looked after him and his illness. But as at the sight of his illness, of the illness of the Blessed One, the horizon became dim to me, and my faculties were no longer clear. Yet there was one little consolation. I thought that the Blessed One would not pass away until he had left instructions touching the order of the Sangha." And when you look at the prophets, there was that sort of thing too. And they were like, hey, don't turn your heels when I go, right? Just, have I conveyed the teachings right? Does anybody have any final questions? That sort of thing. But it wasn't, they didn't want to make it about them. But look at what happened, no matter how clear what was left behind was. Rice Davids, Digha Nikaya, translation 2, page 108. Be ye lamps unto yourself. Be ye refuge to yourselves, betake yourselves to no external refuge. Dipa here does not mean lamp, but it definitely means island. The Digha Nikaya commentary, commenting on the word Dipa, here says, Mahasambudagatam Dipam Viya Atannam Dipam Patitam Katva Viharata. Dwell, making yourselves an island, a support, a resting place, even an island in the great ocean. Samsara. The continuity of existence is usually compared to an ocean. Samsara. Sagara. And what is required in the ocean for safety is an island, a solid island, and not a lamp. I'll probably do these better when I'm not so tired, but I want to make sure they're done. So in the New Age religion playlist, one of the ideas that finds itself is that when you go past the initial 12 planes, or you find yourself in the realm of the ocean of love and mercy that they say. But what if that's the undercurrent? But what if that's the river that we're supposed to ford? The little boat or the big boat? The little boat, you do it yourself, and the big boat, maybe you even do it over. I don't have to do it this generation. I can do it in a future life, right? I can do some and or I can help other people do it, and therefore they'll, helping other people do it. Yeah, okay, but you still got to do it yourself, right? Then the Buddha, full of compassion and human feeling, gently spoke to his devoted and beloved attendant, Ananda. What does the order of the Sangha expect from me? I have taught the Dhamma, truth, without making any distinction as exoteric and esoteric. With regard to the truth, the Tathagata has nothing like the closed fist of a teacher. Acharya Buddha, surely Ananda, if there's anyone who thinks that he will lead the Sangha and that the Sangha should depend on him, let him set down his instructions. But the Tathagata has no such idea. Why should he then leave instructions concerning the Sangha? I am now old, Ananda, 80 years old, as a worn-out cart that has to be kept going by repairs. So it seems to me the body of the Tathagata can only be kept by repairs. Therefore, Ananda, dwell, making yourselves your island, support, making yourselves, not anyone else, your refuge, making the Dhamma your island, support, the Dhamma your refuge, nothing else your refuge. What the Buddha wanted to convey to Ananda is quite clear. The latter was sad and depressed. He thought that they would all be lonely, helpless, without a refuge, without a leader after the great teacher's death. So the Buddha gave him consolation, courage, and confidence, saying that they should depend on themselves and on the Dhamma he taught, and not on anyone else or anything else. Here the question of a metaphysical Atman, ourself, is quite besides the point. Further, the Buddha explained to Anatta how could be one's own island or refuge. How could that make the Dhamma one's own island or refuge? Through the cultivation of mindfulness or awareness of the body, sensations, mind, and mind objects, the four satipathanas. There is no talk at all here about an Atman or self. Another reference often quoted is used by those who try to find Atman in the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha was once seated under a tree in a forest on the way to Uruvela from Benares. On that day, 30 friends, all of them young princes, went out on a picnic with their young wives into the same forest. One of the princes, who was unmarried, brought a prostitute with him. In that culture, prostitute and girlfriend was referred to in the same way. So we need more information to clarify it to the modern ears, right? While the others were amusing themselves, she purloined some objects of value and disappeared. In their search for her in the forest, they saw the Buddha seated under a tree and asked him whether he had seen a woman. He inquired what was the matter. When they explained, the Buddha asked them, "What do you think, young men? Which is better for you, to search after a woman or to search after yourselves?" You don't need a mate to complete you. You should be complete in yourself. But does that mean you shouldn't seek a mate? No, I'm not saying that at all. Only the last sentence is literally translated. The rest of the story is given briefly according to the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. Here again, it is a simple and natural question, and there is no justification for introducing far-fetched ideas of a metaphysical Atman or self into the business. They answered that it was better for them to search after themselves. The Buddha then asked them to sit down and explain the Dhamma to them. In the available account in the original text of what he preached to them, not a word is mentioned about an Atman. Much has been written on the subject of the Buddha's silence when a certain Parivrajaka wanderer named Vatchagota asked him whether there was an Atman or not. The story is as follows. Vatchagota comes to the Buddha and asked, "Venerable Gotama, is there an Atman?" The Buddha is silent. Then, "Venerable Gotama, is there no Atman?" Again, the Buddha is silent. So an agnostic approach. Vatchagota gets up and goes away. After the Parivrajaka had left, Ananda asked the Buddha why he did not answer the Vatchagota's question. The Buddha explains his position. Ananda, when asked by Vatchagota, the wanderer, "Is there a self?" If I had answered there is a self, then Ananda, that would be siding with those recluses and Brahmanas who hold the eternalist theory. Sasata Vada. The eternal universe thing doesn't pan out. It's not really theory, it was just a belief repeated. And there's indication of there actually being maybe a time where there was no time, space, and matter, but these things were imaginary, I guess like imaginary numbers. And Ananda, when asked by the wanderer, "Is there no self?" If I had answered there is no self, then that would be siding with those recluses and Brahmanas who hold the annihilationist theory. Annihilationist theory. Ucheda Vada. On another occasion, the Buddha had told the same Vatchagata that the Tathagata had no theories because he had seen the nature of things. Here too, he does not want to associate himself with any theories. Now there's a huge difference between theory and hypothesis, but the way that Christianity is hinted at, I kind of see what's going on, right? Again, Ananda, when asked by Vatchagota, "Is there a self?" If I had answered, "There is a self," would that be in accordance with my knowledge? that all the Dhammas are without self? Surely not, sir. And again, Ananda, when asked by the wanderer, is there no self? If I had answered, there is no self, then that would have been a greater confusion to the already confused Vajjagota, for he would have thought, formerly, indeed I had an Atman self, but now I haven't got one. It should now be quite clear why the Buddha was silent, but it will be still clearer if we take into consideration the whole background and the way the Buddha treated questions and questionnaires, which is altogether ignored by those who have discussed this problem. The Buddha was not a computing machine, giving answers to whatever considerations were put to him by anyone at all. Without any consideration, he was a practical teacher full of compassion and wisdom. But he did not answer questions to show his knowledge and intelligence, but to help the questioner on the way to realization. He always spoke to people, bearing in mind their standard of development, their tendencies, their mental makeup, and their character, their capacity to understand a particular question. Sabbe Dhamma Anatta, exactly the same words as in the first line, Dhammapada 27, which we discussed above. Woodward's translation of these words by all things are impermanent, Kindred Sayings 4, page 282, is completely wrong, probably due to an oversight. This is a very serious mistake. This perhaps is one of the reasons for so much unnecessary talk on the Buddha's silence. The most important word in this context, anatta, without a self, has been translated as impermanent. The English translations of Pali text contain major and minor errors of these kinds, some due to carelessness or oversight, some to lack of proficiency in the original language. Whatever the case may be, it is useful to mention here, with the difference due to these great pioneers in the field, that these errors have been responsible for a number of wrong ideas about Buddhism among people who have no access to the original text. It is good to know, therefore, that Miss I.B. Horner, the secretary of the Pali Text Society, plans to bring out revised and new translations. In fact, on another occasion, but evidently earlier, when the Buddha had explained a certain depth and subtle question, the question as to what happened to an arahant after death, Vajjagota said, "Venerable Gotama, here I fall into ignorance and get into confusion. Whatever little faith I had at the beginning of this conversion with Venerable Gotama, that is too gone now." So the Buddha did not want to confuse him again. This knowledge of the Buddha is called Indriya Pariyattanana. Okay, I'm going to try that one again. Indriya Parupariyattanana. Oh, that's close enough. And I'm going to